When you hear the word resilience, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Mental toughness? Staying strong? Bouncing back? In this episode, we're going to look deeper at this through the lens of my guest, Jay Muthu. As well as finding out more about his personal story, we'll look at what resilience really means for leaders and organisations, and if purpose, vulnerability and collaboration can strengthen it. Jay's a global HR leader with a career's worth of best practice to share. He also has a deeply personal story that has shaped his perspective of resilience. I'm really looking forward to getting into this conversation. So without further ado, let's welcome Jay. Jay, welcome to In Good Company. How are you today?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for having me here. And thank you, Impact, for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. And as I said, I'm very excited to talk to you today. We have had a call before this, so I'm excited to get into our conversation. But before we do, let's give our audience the chance to get to know you a little bit better. So why don't you introduce yourself within 60 seconds?
Awesome. Oh, that's that can be a lot of time or very little time, depending on the size of your ego, isn't it? So I'll try and stick to the 60 minutes. So I'm, like you said, I am a global HR leader who's worked in a number of very well-known multinational organizations like Thomson Reuters, VMware, Virgin Media, and Randstad. And currently, I am the country HR director for the BT Group in India. Okay. Through my career, I have lived and worked in a few countries and really experienced what it means to work in a global context. And for me, that's very, very important. I have focused a lot of my career in, people development, culture building, diversity and inclusion, etc. Basically, unlocking the potential of all kinds of people. That's very important to me because, I had polio when I was a 1.5-year-old kid. Okay. I grew up in India, and many of you might know that India was probably not the best place for a disabled child with some ambition to grow up. Okay. So, but I never let any of that disability and the challenges which came with it to kind of stop me. I've always believed if you can't walk, roll, isn't it? Okay. And I've decided to roll through my life. And here I am today, and I strongly believe that especially when it comes to minorities of any denomination, it's very important for them to see positive role modeling. You cannot become what you don't see, isn't it? And I almost feel that I have a responsibility to be a positive role model for all the kids who are either disabled or come from an impoverished background and believe that I want to do something bigger than what I am today. And that's why I'm on this podcast.
Amazing. Well, as I said, we're excited to get into to dive a bit deeper into that. Also, I wanted to ask, because your relationship with Impact stems back quite a few years. Could you tell us about that?
Absolutely. In my career, I worked with a number of leadership development organizations, if you were to kind of categorize Impact like that. And Impact has been one of my all-time favorite. I have worked with Impact, or I've known Impact for over 12 years now, 12, 13 years. My first encounter with Impact was when I used to work for Thomson Reuters,
Right.
and we partnered with Impact to probably according to me, one of the best leadership development experiences I've ever been part of, called Generate, which is a multi-award winning program I'm sure all of you are proud of. And then I've continued to stay in touch and used Impact for their work in a number of other organizations I've been part of as well. And some of the folks in Impact, like Scott Rose and others, are good friends of mine. And it was my delight to meet Scott in Bangalore a couple of months ago as well. So I am a lifelong fan of Impact and will continue to cheerlead them.
Well, that's so amazing, and thank you. We really appreciate that. And I joined slightly after your work with Thomson Reuters, but not long after, it seems. So it's amazing to hear that we've had a long-standing relationship with you, and you're still saying nice things about us, which is even better.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, let's get into today's topic then. So there are a lot of misconceptions about what resilience means. So let's hear it in your words. What is resilience?
Different people see resilience very differently, but there was a quote from Robert Jordan, which I read a few years ago, which kind of really encapsulates what resilience means to me from my personal perspective. I'm just going to read it out so that I don't, misread them, isn't it?
Yeah.
The oak fought the wind and was broken. The willow bent when it must, and it survived, isn't it? So for me, resilience is about how do you use your strength, your ability to bounce back from adversity in a
Mm.
very flexible fashion. Uh, so if you say, I am going to stay the course irrespective of what happens, when you're getting punched all the time, if you're in a boxing match and you're going to say, my coach has told me, just keep doing left jab, left jab, left jab, but then you'll get knocked out, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas if you say, at the right time, I'm going to duck and then use my right jab, there is a chance I could survive, isn't it? For me, that's resilience. How do you bounce back from adversity? Uh, by being very flexible. But when I say flexible, there are two other things which is very important for me, which makes somebody resilient or non-resilient.
Hmm.
The first one is you should be very clear about your North Star. What are you trying to achieve this month, this quarter, this year, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years?
Mm.
But the North Star is also very flexible, isn't it? Because what was important for me 15 years ago may not be as important to me today. And what will be important to me 10 years from now may not be as important today. So that flexibility, even in your North Star, is very important. And the other one is you can never be resilient as one individual. Like they always say, it takes a village to bring up a child. It
Yeah.
takes a village to make anyone resilient. So, what are the kind of support systems you're building around yourself kind of defines resilience as well. So, if I were to kind of put this in 4 words, I would say bouncing back from adversity is the first core of resilience. How do you come out
Mm.
of any sort of challenges you might have experienced? While keeping in by being flexible based on the current situation, but while ensuring that your North Star is very clear. Yes, it's a small blip in the journey, and that's how you kind of look at it, and never take the eye off the ball when it comes to the North Star. How do you do that? By creating a support system around you, which will always cheer you, pull you up, and ensure that you feel supported and it
Mm.
doesn't feel like a lonely battle. That's resilience for me. If you're able to cultivate these 4 things, which doesn't happen overnight, but it's over a period of time that you do that. And I think that's been my mantra of resilience.
And often the it comes from a point you're saying it's developed over time for yourself. You mentioned earlier on that you've been a lifelong wheelchair user, which it's going to bring an element of resilience because the world isn't necessarily built in the same way for people using a wheelchair
Yeah.
than it is for. So I guess it comes kind of second nature to you. Does it resilience? Do you think, or do you think, or do you think you've had to? Has there been different periods of your life where your resilience has been particularly tested that you've had to overcome those challenges?
Absolutely, multiple times, isn't it?
Mm.
Otherwise, there's no fun in living, isn't it? If you're not consistently tested, and how do you kind of deal with it? And I actually love
Mm.
that. If life is like an autobahn, a drive on the autobahn, it's good. You will get there faster, but then it's no fun. But if life is like driving in Bangalore traffic, okay, with all its potholes and madness, I think there is an element of fun in it. Okay, so that's how I looked at it. You're absolutely right. I think I developed resilience because, some in hindsight, I could say I didn't have a choice. I had to become resilient considering the
Right.
background I came from. Very lower middle class Indian family. We didn't have a lot of money. We were almost like, you know, let's make the ends meet. And then I ended up having polio, and my parents, with whatever little resources they had, they ended up spending it to trying to see if they could make me walk. Okay, when
Yeah.
nobody could ever tell them that's probably not possible, isn't it? But
Yeah.
everybody came up with a cure. But then one of the best things I think what my parents and my family did, I had an elder brother as well, was to make sure that I went to a school, a normal school. Not that
Hmm.
India had a lot of special schools at the time I was studying in late 70s, okay?
Hmm.
But I went to a normal school. The choice of the school was dictated by the distance to my house and how much my mom or my brother could carry me to school, or my dad, isn't it? So
Mm.
I remember one moment in that school which was quite vivid in my memory. I actually went to school maybe 2.5 years later than most kids, simply because until that period of time, if I could sit like this, I would just fall, because my
Right.
back was so bad. I couldn't sit without any sort of support, even with like a wall or something like that. With some amount of physiotherapy, etc., I started, I could sit up. And then my parents said, okay, now let's get this kid some education. So I went to
Yeah.
school. And I remember so vividly. This is like, sometimes it's just magic of life, isn't it?
Mm.
So this I'm talking about maybe 42, 43 years ago. Okay. And, my mom used to carry me, put me in the class, come back during lunchtime, get me some lunch, and then come back in the evening and take me. That used to be the routine. But one day, my school teachers just thought it's a great idea to introduce physical education. Okay, not that we had a ground or anything like that. It was a
Right.
ramshackle school. Okay, so they took all the kids out to the road to make them play. My mom didn't know that, and it was not the era of WhatsApp. Okay,
Yeah.
so and we didn't even have a landline phone in the house, for example. And I was sat there. Okay, the whole
Mm.
class, it was a long room, like the Lord's long room, and then the whole class went away. I was sat there alone, and teachers obviously didn't know what to do. The best
Yeah.
thing they thought was to just avoid me, and they also walked out. Okay, so I sat there alone for like 45 minutes in that room, uh, not knowing what's going on, isn't it?
Yeah.
I actually cried. I
Yeah.
actually cried. But then the kids came back. Life went back to normal. When I went home, I told my mom. My mom was next day. She told, "Hey, next time you guys are doing something like that, let me know beforehand. I'll try and come, and I could see if I could take him out." Okay.
Oh, well.
But then at the same time, Indian education system is very competitive, as you know. So we used to have these monthly assessments, okay? And we had completed our first month assessment, and they were giving out our report cards, okay? And then we had a very clear stack ranking system, and I was ranked number one in the class, and the whole class clapped for me. So that
Right.
was the contrasting emotion. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, that feels good, isn't it? I could do this. Maybe at that moment in my mind, it sort of clicked. Today, I'm verbalizing it that way. As a 7-year-old, I probably didn't know what it was, but
Sure.
something
Sure.
clicked in me where I thought, okay, what I can do well, I will try and do it really well. And what
Mm.
I cannot, I will not really bother about it. Okay. So today, I can categorize that as strength based leadership, isn't it?
Yeah.
Focus on your strengths and don't really focus on what you cannot do, as long as you're not totally screwing it up, isn't it? Okay, so that has been that one moment is so vivid. I can still visualize how that classroom looked,
Mm.
the face of the teacher, and how I sat there totally despondent, and how I felt when people clapped. That has sort of is like a moment in my life where I've continued to said, okay, let's do this. And through my life, I've gone through a lot of those instances. Like when I finished my university with no, I then school and university. Obviously, my mom couldn't carry me all the time, so
Mm.
I used wheelchairs. I have crawled up. Friends have carried me. Family has carried me.
Mm.
So, but I didn't let any of that really bother me. I went ahead and not just had a good academic career in university, but also did a lot of extracurricular activities. I used to be a very award-winning debater. I used to be a very avid quizzer. I used to quiz
Mm.
a
Hmm.
lot. And my crowning glory was I went on the BBC Mastermind in India, okay,
Oh,
and
wow.
went until the semifinals, okay. So I was probably the first wheelchair user on BBC Mastermind, at least in India. I don't know. I'm not
Sure.
sure about the UK history, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I did all of that, and everything used to be. I had to really plan and think how I will get somewhere. How many steps will be there? Because in India, having steps at every place is almost like you got to have them. Otherwise, you're not an architect. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
used to be quite challenging. Like my knee. my knee is probably the most grotesque looking part of my body. My wife will disagree. She'll say there are lots of other grotesque looking parts of my body. Uh, but because I used to actually crawl, and my
Yeah,
hands
yeah.
are quite rough because I used to crawl quite a lot in
Mm.
the to places. But then, for me, those were just the journey because I was very clear about where I wanted to get, isn't it? And you know,
Yeah.
the village around me helped me realize my potential, and I slowly started building success after success. And even in the corporate world, I've had lots of setbacks. There were times when I've questioned myself to say, uh, am I really good enough, to
Mm,
to deserve this? Okay, there
mm,
is a bit
mm,
of imposter syndrome, but I've always tried to keep it outside of me. And there are times when, they say there are 3 4 things in life which kind of test your mettle, isn't it?
yeah.
Losing a loved one, a
Mm,
divorce, or
mm,
getting laid off from a job. Okay, so I actually got laid off twice when I was in the UK. But I bounced back quite quickly, and I
mm,
realized what
mm,
I could do in that kind of situation. And one of the things I've done that after my last layoff was to be in India and be back home and see what I can do to inspire, hopefully in small ways, kids like me 40 years ago who didn't know when the classroom went out for PE.
mm. It's so true, isn't it, that the way that resilience is built is by experiencing something pretty negative, isn't it?
Yeah,
And it's, I suppose it's unfortunate that that's the way it sometimes has to happen, or perhaps it doesn't. So we'll possibly get to that in a moment. Well, we will get to that in a moment. I just wanted to reflect on a couple of things that you said there because, yeah, I mean it's an astonishing story that you've shared about your kind of experiences growing up. It also sounds like you've been surrounded by resilience from a young age, not necessarily just from your own experience as well, but by your mum, carrying
yeah,
you into school, and even offering to go and carry you to a particular like lesson in the
lesson.
middle of the day. So having that role model in your life, showing her own resilience,
Yeah,
as well, because for her as a parent to experience getting poorly and it, extremely challenging circumstances for her as well, and truly
absolutely.
inspirational for sure.
Yeah, and my mom, for example, women have played a big role in my life, isn't it? Right from my mom to the teachers in school and university, and now my wife, who's probably the best example of resilience, isn't it? Okay, so my mom especially has had a seminal impact on my life, and my dad as well when it comes to the right values which you need to have. But my mom was uneducated. She went to school
Right.
till grade 5, so she doesn't speak a word of English or anything like that. But she knew that the only way my son could have a different life is by focusing on his education, and she was
Mm,
ready to do anything for it. And I
mm,
think
mm.
that sort of role modeling is very important. I almost felt that I had to prove her confidence in me right, many times over, and
Yeah.
that kind of gave me a sense of drive and ambition.
Yeah. Amazing. What a story. One question I did have. You
Yeah,
you mentioned the the you were carried into school. What age were
yeah.
you or how long did it take before you got your first wheelchair, and what did that feel like?
Oh, I got my first wheelchair maybe around 15, 17, 18. Until that
Wow.
time, it was either, being carried or me walking on my force. Okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes my friends would just lift me and just take me to a place, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, when I remember, and then I went through a surgery for a period of time when I
Mm.
started walking with a walker, like a walking
Right.
frame. Uh, that gave me a bit of freedom. Then I actually
Mm.
got a two-wheeler modified with extra wheels, and I used to actually ride. I started dating my wife when I used to ride my
Doing.
modified two-wheeler. Okay,
Oh, amazing.
so in the roads of Bangalore, but uh, so those were the different stages, isn't it? A very bad wheelchair when I was around 16, 17, then started walking around 20s. And then after a point, I realized, walking with the walker was becoming more and more challenging. And
Yeah.
then I moved permanently into a wheelchair. But, you know, uh, and now today, I do a lot of things in life. My big credo in life is one life, do more. Okay. So one of the things which I do a lot, me and my wife, is traveling. We
Yeah.
travel.
Yeah.
We've been to over 55 countries right now. Okay.
Wow.
And in fact, I'm looking forward to our big holiday in next Thursday, actually, where we're going to
Lovely.
New Zealand. Okay,
Oh,
and
amazing.
really looking forward to it. So, yeah, sports, traveling, reading, writing, speaking, quizzing, still once in a while, and then I've got an 8-year-old spending time with her. So I do a lot of things in a day, and
Mm.
obviously having a full-time job as well, and mentoring a lot of you know students from various underprivileged backgrounds is something which I'm very passionate about. So, and being on a wheelchair has kind of changed all of that for me, isn't it? I just feel I'm in control now of what I can do and what I can't do. And
Yeah.
again, I decide what I can't do, for example, and I never fret about it.
I mean, yeah, excellent words of wisdom there that I'm sure a lot of people can learn from, including myself. So the fact that you have students around you means that you're kind of good at imparting knowledge. So let's delve a bit about that and translate what your experience over your life has taught you and allowed you to teach others. So in terms of back in the workplace, then how does the purpose, because you've talked a lot about purpose throughout what you've said so far, how does that influence employee engagement and retention?
Oh, absolutely. I think I'm a big believer, especially if you were to box this into the corporate world or working world.
Yeah.
I think today a lot of us sometimes go through work because there are bills to pay at the end of it. All of us have bills to pay at the end of it, because I'm sure if you all had won the lottery, we might be doing very different things. Maybe
Yeah.
you'd still be doing what you're doing because your job's very interesting, isn't it? Okay. So uh, so the only way you can kind of look beyond the paycheck at the end of the month or week at work is if there is a clear purpose in the organization which aligns with your own personal purpose.
Yeah.
And for a lot of times, for a lot of people, especially in middle age, my generation, we've come from a bit of a scarcity mindset, isn't it? Depending on which generation you were in and where you grew up. So I'm now contextualizing this in India. So our
Mm-hmm.
generations, my parents' generation was definitely a scarcity mindset. Our generation was, yes, if you work really hard, you could escape the scarcity mindset, but you will not really do anything funky and challenging. You will just do a 9 to 5 job and try and make the most out of it.
Right.
So we all feel like sometimes people would feel that they're running on a treadmill without going anywhere. Okay.
Mm.
But the moment you have a clear purpose of what you want to achieve in your life, which at different points of time comes to different people, and then if you can align it to the organization's purpose, then magic happens, in
Mm.
my view. Okay. And today, a lot of work frustration happens with people because they cannot really link to what is the organization purpose and what's my purpose in life. And one
Mm.
of the things which I've always tried to do, especially when I used to run leadership development in organizations, etc., was help people figure out what's their purpose in life. Why are you here? Isn't it?
Mm.
Okay.
Mm.
All of
Mm.
us have a big purpose in life. Some people just bury it because they have the drudgery of the day to day, but some people really, surface it and kind of use it to their benefit. So once you do that, and then you kind of understand the organization you are working for, what's the purpose? Like today, BT's purpose, our public purpose, is connecting for good, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And my personal purpose is so closely linked to it. I really
Mm.
want to
Mm.
help people unlock their potential by connecting with them and inspiring them through my personal experience, for example. And that's exactly what BT does. And that's
Mm.
where it's a marriage of the minds. And then you feel more engaged because whatever the organization is trying to do to connect for good, you're also trying to do to connect for good in your role as a HR leader for India, where you're connecting with all kinds of employees, hopefully doing some good for them in the process. So that is why purpose plays such an important role. I think there are two things which make good leaders great leaders, in my view. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
One is self awareness. Okay.
Yep.
And linked to self awareness is purpose. What is my purpose? Am I able to translate my purpose and the purpose of my team members into the organization purpose? And then I think what you see is real magic. And it has
Mm-hmm.
happened in a number of organizations. There was a time, without naming the organization, for the first ever time, I took a decision which was driven by my mind, a job decision, which was
Yep.
driven by my mind rather than my heart. Okay.
Right.
And 3 days into the job, I realized I had made a mistake. Okay.
Right.
Because the
Yeah.
organization's purpose did not really gel with what you wanted to achieve. I tried my best. My best resilience came out. I tried and gritted through it for almost 12 months. But then it was so daunting, then I had to
Mm,
leave that
mm.
organization. Okay. So I'm again speaking from personal experience. I combined resilience with lack of purpose. It didn't work. But when you combine resilience with purpose, it creates magic.
Yeah, yeah, and very human traits. I think it's becoming more prevalent now, particularly with AI, that that we're still clinging on to very human characteristics. That you talked about self-awareness and you talked about purpose, and particularly purpose. The I think very we talk. I mean, I often reference this behind my
Yeah.
shoulder there,
Yeah.
that the
Yeah.
liberating human potential. It's so important. I and we believe within organisations, and I think even more so now, that needs to be continual focus around sort of human centric
Oh,
behaviours.
you really nailed it, isn't it?
Mm,
Yes, AI will change our lives, isn't it?
mm,
Okay.
mm,
If
mm.
not in the next 6 months, at least in the next 6 years, for
Yeah,
example.
and
But
already
what will
has.
remain, yeah, and already has, but what will remain core is exactly what you said, isn't it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Uh, AI can never replace human potential. AI can never replace human way of interacting with purpose. And AI can never make me more self-aware than my own reflection,
Sure.
uh, isn't it?
Yeah,
And
totally agree.
in today's world where people are actually on the edge, what will happen if will I lose my job? Will AI take
Mm,
over my job?
mm,
But if people are able to really think about how am I contributing to the organization beyond what I do on a daily basis, which could be replaced by AI, but what value am I adding? And then if people start really rethinking their own future,
mm.
connecting to their purpose, I think people would be in a slightly less stressful situation because the machines are coming. But the human is not prepared, then the machines will take over. But if the human is prepared, I don't think the machines have a chance.
Mm. Yeah, that's super interesting. Another human characteristic that's not seen in AI is vulnerability. We often, again, another potentially misunderstood aspect in leadership. So, what what would you say is why is it important to embrace vulnerability to strengthen leadership and resilience?
Thank you. Thank you so much for asking that question. And I think that the notion of vulnerability is so important in today's world, isn't
Mm.
it? Because vulnerability is to say, I'm afraid.
Yeah,
Okay. Isn't it? Okay. Resilience is to say, I'm afraid, but I'm flexible and I know I can work around this.
yeah,
Uh, so vulnerability and flexibility are like the two sides of the same coin. But unfortunately, since time immemorial, the best leaders who we have all worshipped have come across as strong,
mm.
macho, dominant kind of people, isn't it? Right from Alexander to Winston Churchill to Saddam Hussein to everyone, where you are like a man. And in today's world, with so much of noise around male domination and stuff like that,
Mm.
people think being vulnerable is like the worst trait you can have, uh,
Mm. Like a
which
sign of
is the
weakness.
a sign of weakness, which is the
Mm.
biggest misconception, isn't it?
Mm.
Okay. It takes a brave man to stand up and say, I failed or I screwed up. Okay. That I think is the biggest symbol of strength. But in the corporate world, especially, we have stereotyped successful leaders to be people who will never shed a tear, who will never have a moment, okay,
Mm.
who will never take a pause, isn't
Mm.
it? Because
Mm.
leaders are supposed to go and get it done, okay. But
Mm.
if you look at some of the most successful organizations in the world today, and if you go back in their story, you will realize that vulnerability played a big role. One of my most favorite corporate leaders of today is Satya Nadella, okay, the CEO of Microsoft, okay. If you read his
Yeah.
book, Hit Refresh, he talks about it so nicely that when he got his leadership team into a retreat, first time he became CEO, they were all like, we are this stoic, forceful leaders, isn't
Yeah.
it? And then they did an exercise where people had to get vulnerable. And after 2 days, people were in tears. And today you
Mm.
see
Mm.
in the 8, 9 years Satya has run Microsoft, what has happened to that company, isn't it? It has
Mm.
grown like 20 times or whatever. Uh, uh, so vulnerability is extremely critical. And if there are people, leaders listening to this podcast, I would say, please be vulnerable
Mm.
both in your personal life and in your work life. It will not undermine you. In fact, it will make you more stronger and you will build better resilience if you're
Mm.
vulnerable. Because
Mm.
resilience can only come when you accept that you are on the back foot. Okay.
Sure.
Uh, and you will only accept you're on the back foot if you're vulnerable. Okay. So if you really need to kind of uh, become successful in the long term, in the long run, I think both vulnerability and resilience need to be there. There is no magic sauce that you can feed people to become vulnerable. It's
Yeah.
just people becoming more comfortable in their own skin. And that's where self awareness becomes very important. So we
Definitely.
teach leaders a bunch of stuff, how to lead in digital transformation, how to do agile,
Yeah.
how to do
Yeah.
this, how
Yeah.
to do that. Teach three things: self awareness, being vulnerable, being resilient. Everything else, because they're smart people, that's why they're leaders, they will learn through the course of work. Whereas these three things, no university teaches you, it's only
Mm.
life which teaches
Mm.
you. And a lot of people, especially if they've had, you know, tough childhoods and tough growing up years, find it very difficult to connect to that part of their psyche.
Mm.
And somewhere organizations need to help them to connect to that part.
Well, I mean, that's it. Is that you touch on it there? Is that becoming or being vulnerable is very uncomfortable for a lot of people, particularly in a non-personal. To be personal in a professional environment, again, there's that I think is changing over the years as new
Yeah,
generations come in. I think that is changing, but there's still that um, there's still that uncomfort. That's not the right word, but there's still that
discomfort.
lack discomfort. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's there's still that discomfort around being vulnerable, and the and we often talk about the best learning is when you step out of your comfort zone, and being vulnerable actually is because often we think of stepping out of your comfort zone is facing your fears in a sort of in quite a dramatic way, but in actual fact, the being vulnerable is such um, a sort of a a difficult way to get out of your comfort zone. But the things that,
yeah,
as you've said, the things that can come from that, if you do that and do it in a safe way,
yeah,
surround yourself with people that you can trust,
yeah.
and do it in a forum that it allows you to be vulnerable and also be safe. I
Good,
think there's so
good.
much power that can come from that.
Yeah,
So
and I
much
think
power.
as organizations, you really touched upon a very important point around being vulnerable in a very safe setting. Because
Mm.
today, if a leader becomes vulnerable in an organization which is not used to that kind of behavior, you could be considered to be a weak link, you know,
Yeah.
uh, probably cannot lead the organization, so you need to move on, etc. So
Yeah.
organizations need to change. But there is hope, isn't it? That today's
Yeah.
generation, the Gen Z and the Gen Alpha and everyone, they have actually got no filters. You know, I was in a uh, there was a
Yeah.
there was a literary festival in Bangalore on Sunday where I was watching some panel discussions, and there was a topic which is a bit uncomfortable in the India context, and it had a couple of Gen Z people on it, and the way they spoke about it, okay, I was like, there is hope in this
Yeah.
world, okay.
Yeah.
With every generation, I think the world gets better, okay,
Yeah.
and I think the upcoming generations, especially the Gen Z and hopefully the Gen Alpha, are creating those conditions where, you know, we all know they are all about purpose. They want to work for organizations which have well
Mm.
defined purpose and what you're going to do. They are very vulnerable. They share what they want to do. One of the areas which they probably lack a little is resilience, but hopefully, as time goes by and they see more and more
Yeah, that's
setbacks,
interesting. Yeah.
okay, they will start developing resilience as well. But at least they've got two out of the three ingredients right.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing. Well, how about this then? So, on a practical level, then, what advice would you give a leader who is not only trying to build their own resilience, but also trying to create those conditions for their people to do the same? We touched on this a little bit, but let's get a
Yeah,
sort of a
yeah,
more sort of
I
concise.
agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think one of the things which they all need to do is to kind of create a clear and evolving purpose, you know, because I think that's the first step for people to be both vulnerable and resilient, isn't it?
Mm.
Having, why does this team exist? What is
Yep.
that we need to achieve? Okay. And that can evolve with the organization strategy, plans, business, markets, everything. But continuously revisiting your purpose is very important. The second one is, you know, you might think I'm being naive and live in la la land, but injecting a sense of optimism is very, very important.
Mm.
Okay, as leaders, because a lot of times as leaders we are hit with more and more and more negative news, especially in today's world.
Sure.
Okay,
Sure.
but somewhere finding a silver lining in the dark cloud as a leader is very important. Okay, so injecting small doses of optimism into the team is important, because obviously you will have to do a lot of dirty and bad work. That's life. Okay, but there are moments which you kind of have those, oh wow, this is fantastic, isn't it? Okay,
Mm.
that
Mm.
optimistic moments is important. The third one is when those moments happen, how do you celebrate is critical as well, isn't it? When I
Mm.
say celebrate, it's not have a rowdy drunk night out, but then how do you acknowledge that,
Yeah.
you know, Dan was a bit vulnerable today, and because of that we identified where the problem was, isn't it? Okay,
Mm.
because sometimes when you admit something, why you screwed up something, it's not about you screwing up something, isn't it? Because there was something in the system which was not working well, and you did not figure it out and fix it. Okay, so, and then calling out those kind of things and making it safe for people to be being vulnerable and celebrating those moments is very important. And the last one is the last two ones. If you are able to do that, when vulnerability happens and people are trying to accept mistakes and then go solve it, you know what actually happens? Great problem solving and creativity comes in.
Mm.
Okay. When you make a mistake and you don't tell that you made a mistake, that means that problem is still left there. Whereas
Yeah.
when you say, I tried, you know, fixing a square box with a round ball, then people say,
Yep.
hey, that's not the way you do it. You got to get a square box to fix a square box. Okay. So you're able to now problem solve and get creative. And once you start problem solving and creative, the productivity in team improves, isn't it? So the vulnerability has got a great connection to that. And the last one, which is very, very important for me, is create that village as a leader. You know,
Mm.
I'm not here going to say that, you know, my colleagues or my family and all that. That's a whole lot of BS. But what I say is, when people are in your team, treat them with respect, give them that space, create that safe environment where people can experiment and make mistakes, and be there to support each other. Be
Mm.
that village where people can be resilient, people can be vulnerable. And all of this actually doesn't cost money. It just
Mm.
takes a moment to take a step back on the treadmill and say, what am I going to do different from tomorrow morning?
Yeah, and that in itself can be a challenge, can it? Is that you really have to make time for this, that reflection
Got to
piece that
make
you've
time.
talked about. Yeah, you talked about, it's kind of a reflection piece there, isn't it, around what and taking time to notice what's going on around you, making decisions around that, and then acting upon
Yeah.
those. The and yeah, you have to be active in that. You have to
You've
be
got to be
active
active.
to make that time.
Remember
Um,
one thing, leadership is not a spectator sport.
what a great quote.
Leadership is being in the game and playing it. You're not the Davis Cup's non-playing captain.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a great way of looking at it. I like that a lot. The and so what would you say then is a sort of maybe as a starting point, maybe as a small habit or mindset shift that leaders can start tomorrow to build their resilience? What advice would you give?
Yeah, I'm going to give a non, I'm going to kind of take us out of the corporate treadmill and
Great.
say, I think for all leaders, if they want to become resilient and kind of cultivate that in their own teams, the first thing they need to do is to build a village around them.
Yeah.
Okay. Build your support system, and your support system could be your family, friends, ex-colleagues, current colleagues, bosses, etc. Invest in personal relationships, because a lot of us today seem to be so caught up in the day to day that we forget to take that moment and spend that 5 minutes with our loved one or a close friend or someone. Uh, and then we realize that when you are down in the dumps, you realize that there's no one around you. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so create that ecosystem around you, which kind of, will be there for you when you need it. Build it before you need it. Don't build it when you need it.
Yeah.
Okay. So take that moment, go on the long walk with your wife or spouse or partner. Okay. Play that Uno with your child. Okay. Go out for lunch with your friend, isn't it? Okay. And when you're at the workplace, take someone out for coffee and talk about random stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. At a
Yeah.
human level. That's very, very important, because that village is what will protect you when the machines come, when the stress comes, and when everything else comes.
Yeah.
That's very, very important.
Yeah. It's so true. That human connection is so important and so instrumental to us being resilient and being able to cope with
Yeah. Yeah.
certain challenges.
I'm sorry I didn't have a Harvard Business Review kind of an answer how to build resilience. I had a very fundamental, basic thing to do to build resilience.
But I think that's it. That is where it comes from. It comes from those fundamentals, because it isn't trying to solve how to get us to move to Mars. It isn't. It's just
Oh,
it's basic. Well, if you give it the time, the answers are already there, aren't they? You just
the
need to give
answers
it
are
that.
already there.
That's
Yeah,
it.
and in today's social media fueled world, where I have 49,000 friends on Instagram, but most of the time I'm lonely. I think this connection really matters. And if you're
Yeah,
looking at the future generation, I think even for them, that human to human connection building will build resilience, because that's one thing all of us worry about our future generation, isn't it? They may not have that sort of resilience our
yeah,
generation and the generation before us probably had.
yeah. It's so true. Jay, I could talk to you for hours, but we are running out of time, sadly. I do have one final question for you before I let you go,
Yeah.
which is the same question we ask all of our guests on this podcast. And I think with your story, this will be particularly interesting. If you had the opportunity to talk to your younger self, and you were starting again, what would be the best piece of advice you would give yourself?
This was one answer I thought about when I was preparing for this conversation.
Yeah,
I think for me, it's setbacks are the building blocks of success. Okay. Embrace them. Don't fight them.
it's great. I'm almost lost for words there, because it's just a really nice way and summarizes this episode entirely. And yeah, it's just what a wonderful piece of advice. And as I say, I could, and hopefully I will, but maybe not whilst we're recording, would speak to you for a lot longer. It's been wonderful talking with you today. Thank you ever so much for giving us your time and sharing your story with us. It's been, I feel very privileged to be able to speak to you today.
And thank you so much for having me on this. And hopefully, this is the sort of messaging which Impact believes in, isn't it? And hopefully it creates some impact, I kind of live for it. And then
using the classic pun.
Using the classic pun. And whoever cares to listen to this podcast, I think all of us have somebody in you just need to let them come out.
Yeah. That's so true. So true. Jay, thank you ever so much for joining us. That's been great. So that just leaves me to say that if you would like to find out any more about Impact or the work we do, or perhaps you'd like to connect with either Jay or myself on LinkedIn, or maybe you'd like to go back and look at our previous episodes of In Good Company, then you will find all of the links that you need in the description of where you found today's episode. So thank you one final time to Jay for joining me today. Thank you, Jay.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
And until the next time, take care.